Great. Thanks, everybody. That was a really great conversation, and I think it's teed us up well for the next segment of our program, which is a panel discussion that we're going to do with Stephen Ramage and Chris Obrecht and Sylvia Wilson. If you wouldn't mind turning your cameras on, that would be great. We'll get started there. I'm going to be interviewing the group and asking some questions, but we again will welcome any of your questions or comments in the chat as we're going forward. I know there was a question in the chat in the last conversation about the World Bank, and it's great that we have Chris Albrecht here because he's a senior advisor to the World Bank as well, so that he'll be able to put some questions there. But the title of this panel is addressing. Pardon me. It's EO capacity development in the decade ahead, and as you'll know, our theme for the day is looking at how EO data and EO capacity development can be used to help solve global development challenges. So we're focused really heavily on what we can be doing to make an impact, and being sure that our efforts and all the resources and this dedicated effort we're putting into coordination and partnering is really having an impact and delivering the kinds of results that our users want to see and that our users need. So that's kind of a theme for our day today. And this panel is taking a look at practitioners of capacity development in the EO world, and looking broadly at kind of the enabling mechanisms and donor engagement and support processes that are taking place right now. And we're really looking to bring fresh views into the conversation as we're thinking about what WGCapD is looking forward to in the next decade of its work. We're hoping to have some challenging ideas put on the table. So we're going to be looking at trends and what we're doing well and what we're not doing well, and asking our presenters for some candid feedback there. But let me just introduce our three panelists. As we have Stephen Ramage, who's head of external relations at GEO, the Group on Earth Observations. Chris Albrecht, as I mentioned, is a program coordinator of global development assistance at the European Space Agency, and also senior advisor to the World Bank. So good that he's got so many hats. Also, Sylvia Wilson is a scientist with the U.S. Geological Survey, who is in a leadership role with Silva-Carbon. She's co-chair of the steering committee, and many of you probably know that Silva-Carbon is an interagency platform that's assisting countries in improving forest monitoring. So we're delighted to have Sylvia with us today too. Let me just start out by asking each of you to introduce yourselves briefly and tell us a little bit about your work and your engagement in Earth observation. And Stephen, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Erin. Hi, Chris. Hi, Sylvie. So yeah, I've been at GEO since 2016. I came in under the great Barb Ryan, so she was my reason for joining. It's a bit of a funny story because I didn't actually think she was talking about a GEO vacancy. But anyway, I've been here. I'm in my 5th year, and I guess what I'm trying to do is trying to move. I think part of it is the comment that Angelica Gutierrez just put in the comments about we don't always need people to understand the data. And I think that's where I spend a lot of my job, is trying to help people bridge the gap between the science and the technology and the kind of policy and business models. So trying to do that sort of translation piece, and really trying to explain the value and usefulness of Earth observations. GEO has, well over 100 countries now, and they're all at different levels of maturity, different levels of understanding, with different levels of priorities. And so I see a lot of my job, and I lead a couple of teams at GEO. One is communications, and another one is our engagement priorities. So that, the slide Barb put up with the Paris Agreement, the Sendai Framework, and the SDGs, we're also building or developing a 4th engagement priority around urban resilience. So that would be sustainable cities and human settlements. So I'm sort of sitting in the middle of a lot of the scientists and the technologists and the work that's going on, and trying to distill and understand what that message is, so I can then play that to the GEO members, because we're a membership organization. But I've been in geospatial since early 90s. So I'll stop there, but that gives you a feel for what I'm doing.
Great. Chris, let's hear from you.
Thanks a lot. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. So first, thanks for having me. I mean, it's always tough to go after Barb's 69 years in 69 seconds. So I'll give you a very short version of me in fewer seconds. My name is Chris Albrecht. You already introduced me. Thanks. After having actually served for about 4.5 years as the European Space Agency representative and senior advisor at the World Bank headquarters in Washington, D.C., as of last year, I have assumed the new role of program coordinator of ESA's new GDA, Global Development Assistance Program. I also currently serve on the technical advisory groups of the Global Environment Facility and the GPSTD. So I've been fortunate to live and work on 3 continents and adopt a very diverse perspective on geospatial and Earth observation domain over the last 15 years or so, through experience in academia, public, private, as well as intergovernmental institutions, including the World Bank, GFDR, NOAA, Astrium, and the Austrian Institute of Technology. So as for ESA's activities on EO capacity building, I'd like to focus on our dedicated efforts supporting developing countries through strategic engagements with development banks and development agencies. Obviously, ESA is engaged in a lot of other activities, and I'm sure Francesco, who is moderating the following panel, can add a lot to that, but I'll focus on the work we do with the development community. The GDA program, actually, in that sense, is part of a broad scope initiative jointly implemented with international financial institutions such as the World Bank and also Asian Development Bank. And it's called Space in Support of International Development Assistance, or short SPACE for IDA. Space for IDA, in turn, is building on the success of 10+ years strategic partnership with IFIs, most recently under the ESA-financed EO4SD, Earth Observation for Sustainable Development Initiative. And EO4SD really follows a user-oriented approach covering the full value chain of stakeholder engagement, requirements assessment, EO service development and delivery, as well as capacity building. So obviously we'll focus on that last chain element there today. So the long-term goal, which is now also further pursued under Space for IDA, is to mainstream the use of satellite EO in development operations and realize the full potential impact for those who need it most. I guess we all agree that in developing countries the need is very high, and we should do our best to support that. So I'd like to conclude with 2 takeaway points that I'm sure we'll address again in the discussion. So first, let's not get carried away with the amazing technology that we are dealing with. We really need to have our focus firmly on building outcome and impact-oriented capacity, right? Hence, put the development challenge first and use the tools at our hands to create solutions, not push for a technology for the sake of it. Second, let's always keep in mind long-term sustainability. It's not good enough to teach and preach. We need to go beyond capacity building towards actual skills transfer, which then will spark growth of local digital economies and ideally facilitate independence of us. Because the space community should be a facilitator, but not in the long run driving the agenda. So I leave it with this. I think we'll have a lot of interesting points to discuss in this panel. Thanks again.
Sylvia, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Erin and Nancy, for the invitation to this panel. Hello to all. I'm Sylvia Wilson, and I'm a forester and a remote sensing specialist with the United States Geological Survey. And what I do is to help developing countries to build strong national forest monitoring systems. For the past year, I've been working in the capacity building field, and currently I'm the co-chair of the Silva Carbon program, which I have been working with 10 years as well. This program objectives is to build technical capacity in countries to help them, to get them ready to report to the UNFCCC, reducing emissions by reducing deforestation and forest degradation, sustainable management of forest conservation, an enhancement of carbon stocks initiative, or is well known as RED+. So we've been working with 25 developing countries, forested countries, and my role as a co-chair of this program is to build the value of my agency to it and work for the USGS. So we do a lot of the work with the remote sensing. However, the Silva Carbon program have other agencies involved. The Forest Service is a key player on this program as well, and they work with countries helping develop the capacity on implementing the forest inventories or ground-based data. USAID and state departments are the funders for this program, and they work a lot in policy and decisions and the connection with the international forums. Also, this program is sit within another program that it's more international and bigger. This is the Global Forest Observation Initiative, most known as GFOI. GFOI is a flagship of GEO and is a partnership of international donors that are working with building forest monitoring, improving the science of forest monitoring for reporting to RED and other reporting forums like SDGs or the World Bank, the UNFCCC programs. So within that avenue, within that big forum, I'm also the co-chair for the United States. So I play different hats, but it's all related to forest monitoring. I've been passionate about forestry for a long time. I'm a forester by training, and I'm formerly Peruvian, so my first years of experience were in the Amazon. So now, having this role as a capacity building and working back in the Amazon or forester countries, I bring that knowledge as well, but also I carry different hats. I carry the hats of the developed country, and I carry the hat of the experience of a developing country. So I understand very well your point, Christopher, that you make at the end, to not get distracted by all these big methodologies and big data and all those things, but actually focus on what are we trying to do and the results we want to achieve. My work is very related with the UNFCCC, with the IPCC, and somehow we are connected with this group of CEOs. So I'm very grateful to be invited to this panel, and I'm looking forward to more collaboration with this group as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was a great introduction. I'm really excited to see and hear more about your work and how these pieces fit together. In a way, it seems like it's part of each one of you sort of comes from a corner of that enabling environment that Barb talked about in her slides. And I think, Sylvia, it'll be really interesting to hear from you at really working on the ground, both in thinking about a specific policy process and how through your work you're supporting local actors and delivering on the mandates of those policies. So that's a really interesting perspective. But let me, as you know, this is the 10th annual meeting of WGCapD, and we're taking a little bit of time to look back and reflect, and then also taking time definitely to think forward about what we're doing. Let me ask all of you, when you take a step back and you think about Earth observation in recent decades, what are the things you really point to as the big successes? What are the things you think that we should say, this has been a fantastic achievement, this is something we did well and we should be proud of? And I open it to whoever would like to jump in.
I can jump in.
Go ahead, Sylvia.
Okay, well, looking back 10 years, I guess what has been a sustainable achievement, I think that data. I mean, I start this game of I mean, it's been fun. It's been a journey of capacity building for the past 10 years. But what has been really changing is how do we see data, how data have transformed from 10 years to now. Barbara was talking about how USGS opened the archive, the open policy data was happening in 2008. When I started working in Silva Carbon was the beginning of 2011. only 3 years, right, after USGS opened this archive. In the beginning, we fly to countries with big hard drives, bringing all the images to countries. But the thing is, like, at that time, even the scientists that were putting together processes and building products based on time series analysis were learning, because they were now getting access to all these archives. So we didn't have any of that. We didn't have time series analysis products. We didn't have a way to implement monitoring systems that it wasn't really very difficult for the countries. We have to fly with data, but the countries have to do all the pre-processing of the data, all the analysis of the data. And that problem, definitely, if you see now, but we have data, it's also a problem, because it presents their own challenges now, because the amount and the volume of data, it's so big that the countries have a problem analyzing of the data, integrating all the different satellites, storing all the data. But I think the big achievement, and this is thanks to the space agencies and the open policy, is to see how the data have changed through the years. It's amazing, because it's 10 years. It's not a big period of time, but we can do now versus what we can have done in 2011 is two completely different stories.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can talk about that and give a lot of examples forever, but I'm gonna let Steven jump in.
Maybe I can jump on that, Steven, if you don't mind. Actually, I would like to build on the data aspect, and it's good you refer to the massive amount of data that's coming in. Steven, you may remember we were again on a panel together a number of years ago at SAT Summit, where they coined the term big data and fat data. I like that very much in terms of describing that you only actually make use of a small share of the whole data avalanche that's coming in. In any case, I think I agree with you in terms of data. I always put my 5 A's. It's about the hurdles that we need to overcome, and I guess we've done a lot of progress there. The 5 A's are availability and accessibility. So I think a lot has changed over the last 5 years on that. Also, obviously, with the Copernicus program becoming active over the, let's say, last five years or so. But it continues then, right, in terms of acceptance, in terms of awareness, and then ideally on the way towards full adoption of these types of data and derived services in policy making and decision making. But I think that going back to the data, I think really the advances in technology, they facilitate or have facilitated a certain democratization of EO. So obviously that term is used a lot in the whole new space discussion on different things, from launching to other things, but it really indeed very much affects that last part of the chain, the capacity building component, because in a sense you really don't have to be an expert anymore. You don't need to have a PhD in Earth observation to create immense value on top of the raw imagery and data that's being collected. So the capacity building has changed drastically, because you have much more user-friendly approaches. You can go beyond the consideration of disruptive tech to make this something completely normal, and I think this is really the approach that's being pushed also over the last couple of years. So I think the last 10 years have been really exciting, and if we can continue that pace over the next 10 years, then we'll be in a good shape in 2030.
So I kind of, I mean, everything that Sylvia and Chris have said is I completely agree. I think there's two other aspects for me. One is community. A huge community has developed. I'm very active on social media, and there are now tens of thousands of people, from ministers to software engineers to Emil and all his buddies. I mean, there's people across all of social media on Earth observations because of these data and because of these platforms and infrastructures. So that's first for me, is this huge community that's now really developing globally. I mean, it's every part of the world, there's someone doing something on Earth observations, and it's quite staggering. The second thing I'd say is, Chris talked about outcome impact-oriented approaches. And Sylvia talked about the results we want to achieve. And one of the things that I've been trying to do here is think about the work of GEO around kind of results, impact, and value. So if I look at what we did with GeoGlam, working with NASA Harvest and Surveyor and others in East Africa, the result was that we triggered some World Bank disaster risk financing for about 300,000 people in the Karamoja region of Uganda, thanks to GeoGlam. And GeoGlam is a decade old now. It's 2011, so we're a decade on. The impact was that food security challenges, including availability of food, jobs, general welfare, were all addressed because of this early warning. And the value is the government of Uganda realized the saving of more than $2.5 million because in a single financial year, because this was triggered early. So this as well as tackling the social challenges ahead of time, it had an immediate impact. And that's where I see, so community development and impact are the two big changes that I see. And I know Chris will talk a lot more about EO4SD and the work they're doing at the bank, but I think those enabling conditions that Barb talked about and what Chris and Sylvia just mentioned are really, it's almost catapulted, the amount of people who are there and who are actively engaged in Earth observations today for impact.
Thanks. Those are really good points, and I'd like to turn a little bit to thinking about what could we be doing better, where are we falling short in our efforts, and I think Stephen, my first question is back to you about this community, and I'm sure Chris and Sylvia, you have opinions, but so are we leveraging the power of that community well? Do we need to be doing more to mobilize those networks and get people involved? Is that one area where we could be doing a better job?
So, as a white middle-aged man. And I don't know when middle age is, but I'm 50 this year, so I'm hoping I'm going to live to 100 so I can do this for another 50 years.
No, I'm over 50, so you're not middle-aged yet. Middle age is, I think, 70.
But, I think some of the things I really try hard to do are kind of like diversity and inclusion and youth engagement. And I think that's where we probably fall over. The fact that I'm a white guy sitting here doing this, we should have a bit more diversity than me. I think for me, a lot of it also, Barb talked about the better integration and coordination. I think that comes back to literacy. And so a lot of the literacy is around those different entities who are new, who are coming into the new community. So it might be financial literacy, I'm sure Chris can talk to that, or it might be environmental literacy. There's a lot of stuff about environmental and social governance. I've just done a course in sustainable finance at Cambridge University, so that I could learn about their literacy and their language, about capital flows, about all the things that where the trillions of dollars are going and how Earth observations can feed into that. So for me, we do need to bring along the community. We need to make sure they don't reinvent the wheel, because people are suddenly trying to tell us all about interoperability. Well, we've kind of known this stuff for a while. But not just on the technical side, there's also cultural and political interoperability as well. So for me, it's the inclusion part, and it's also, the literacy part as well. And the literacy, Jana's coming in as the new director of GEO, and we were talking about, quite often in Earth observations, we talk about insights, or if you're in the defense and intelligence community, you talk about intelligence. And we need to move people more towards evidence. So not just insights and intelligence, but evidence. And that evidence is something where CEOS has a huge role, and where we could think about building something like an evidence toolkit, something like that. This was Jana's idea, that's why I'm saying. But I would absolutely support that, because for me, doing something like that is all about building the literacy across communities. Sorry, that was a really long answer, but it's only a few things I meant to say.
Chris or Sylvia, want to follow up on any of those points, or want to add your own points about where you think we could be doing a better job?
I have a lot to say, but Sylvia, please go first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, that point about community, it's important, I think, and if I think about deeply on this, I think that is, yes, it's the communications that have changed over the years, but also the community of science, right, also have changed, and the way people share data, share stuff. If I think back and I think now, and we have platforms like, for example, GitHub. We have a place where people who develop an algorithm go ahead and put their code in there, and it's free and open access for someone to get it and manipulate it. And that have actually also changed how the way of capacity development is delivered to countries. And that is a value of community, how the science is improving by sharing knowledge across borders. And really, we don't need a middleman, right? If you have the GitHub and an open source algorithms, anybody can pick them and use them. So that open source is great and is a value added of community. I think that how we can be improved, if you're asking from the point of space agencies or CEOs, the role of CEOs, I think that reaching out to key partners or building partnerships. I'm not sure if CEO's role is to build capacity building, is to provide data or to plan for acquisitions of data that is well coordinated and it fits the needs for the countries, monitoring any area, right? But the capacity building programs across the border, across the areas, are experts on delivering, but the most important thing, they're experts on. There is a methodology to build capacity, and the first step is the exploration, right? To explore what change needs to happen. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? Why do we have to build capacity, and what area? And I think that is, if CEOs or the group or the space agencies make the right connections with capacity building programs, they will understand the country needs much better, because the capacity building programs were on the ground. We're talking to people that face the challenges of the amount of data, face the challenges of not enough data, or not having exactly what they need for the purposes they need it. So building these partnerships, I think we can do better, and it's perhaps necessary. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks a lot. I just followed the chat here in parallel, and I see the comment of Juan Carlos, which I find an excellent one. It kind of builds on what I said. We should go beyond capacity building towards actually transferring skills. So I'll get back to that in a little bit. But on the community building and to the question, I think, so yes, we should build communities, we should grow our communities, but I think often we're a little bit too self-centered, right? So we just aim at growing our own community rather than getting out of our comfort zone and actually working with those people who are really not in our community. That could really spark something new and something exciting. Actually, if I look back 10 years, this pretty much coincides with when I started first working at the World Bank, and at that time there were really just very few people who were experts in geospatial analytics and Earth observation. You could have a handful of people who had a background in remote sensing. So now there is a community of practice which is like 600-700 people in the World Bank, which is still small compared to the size of World Bank staff, but it just shows that there is really an incredible increase in an expert community. And then actually we going beyond that expert community, referring to that building data literacy, right? And so it's really to teach or to actually raise awareness with the economists and with the government counterparts in the countries, with those who actually need to build solutions to address their challenges. And I think if you said the question was, do we leverage that community good enough? I think we can certainly do more, right? We should try to to build fit for purpose solutions. I think that's so important. Not just try to have a solution and tell them that this is the right thing for them, right? But try to create fit for purpose solutions to really integrate into their thinking and involve the community, the end user community, more in the actual process of developing the solution. And Sylvia, you mentioned, the space agencies, tasks, etc. And I think really a lot of what we can do and what CEOs can do is to keep illustrating, to demonstrate the value, right? I mean, we've done a lot of that, but not try to actually operationalize everything, because eventually, and that refers back to Juan Carlos, right? If in the long term we want to be sustainable, or we want these approaches to be sustainable, then it should be operationalized in the countries, right, through processes that are already ongoing. And what Stephen mentioned, that example of the disaster risk finance program with the World Bank. So I have a number of those. I don't want to go in details on that yet, but if we manage to integrate satellite Earth observation into standard development finance processes, right, that's when we can start talking about a operationalization, about the standards, right, about the space community moving a bit, taking a back seat and not actually driving the agenda, because that's not what our mandate should be. Yeah, I guess I leave it with that, because I could keep talking for another hour. You're on mute, Erin.
Sorry, terrible facilitator faux pas there. Let me ask you a little bit more about donors in the donor context and policymakers. And do you think people are, that particular group, donors and policymakers, do you think they're sufficiently energized around the importance of Earth observation for development? Can you share a little bit from where you sit, from your perspectives, about whether it's an important priority and whether we should be doing more to cheerlead and advance that as a solution to development challenges? Chris, you're smiling.
Stephen, I guess you can.
Yeah,
Let
me step in before Chris has a monologue, because he can probably talk about this for days. Yeah, I think probably in the last 12 months, I've seen more than in the last 5 years at GEO. So the awareness is definitely growing. I couldn't agree more with what Chris just said about having EO in the standard development finance programs, like having EO as part of that. I mentioned that I did this course in sustainable finance, and I was alongside investment managers, fund managers, brokers, families, lots and lots of people who are coming into climate action from an investment perspective, and they have no idea what we do. 300 people on the course, and I was the guru. I mean, I was getting people asking me all sorts of stuff, and there's now a separate group to talk about, satellites for good, and I'm like, let's not reinvent the wheel here. All this stuff exists. Go and look at these different fora, look at the World Bank, look at what they're doing, look at Copernicus, look at, all these programs exist, all this data is available. So it goes back to what I guess I was saying, is the literacy is across multiple different communities, and it's no different for the donors. The donors are still trying to learn, what's available, what's the difference between drones versus satellites versus in situ versus space-based versus remotely sensed. I get these questions a lot, and they want to find ways to introduce new technologies, to look at these knowledge infrastructures where they're lacking. So the budgets have to include Earth observations, and I've been speaking to, I think I've spoken to Austria, France, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Germany, UK, USA, all about food security, and they're all doing different things and supporting different programs. I have one single goal, which is to get money for GeoGlam or GeoGlows or other activities that are related. But there is definitely a lot of sort of parallel activities. So I think, like Chris said, there are communities of practice developing, but they still have their own, I can't think of a better word, but they still have their own silos within the donor community. So I think awareness is definitely raising, but there's still a lot of education to do in there.
Sylvia, go ahead. If you want, otherwise I get going.
Okay. Well, yes, these ecosystems of donors. I can only talk about the forest monitoring side, and I think the most important partnership for my program has been the Global Forest Observation Initiative. But the thing, Erin, is that we choose this partnership. All of the programs, donors, contributors to the initiative, we seek this partnership because we know we overlap. So that's the truth. We know we have same mandates. We have similar vision and probably the same mission, but to improve the science of forest monitoring in support of the of building RED strategy, we need to coordinate. We may not have the same countries, all programs, all of us have different priorities in terms of countries, and we respond to those countries, but we certainly have a great deal of geographical overlap, right? So if we don't collaborate, if we don't communicate, if we don't coordinate, we most likely will be replicating efforts in countries. And that has happened so many times where we walk into a country and what is, I'm just gonna call names here. What is FAO doing? What is Silver Carbon is doing? What is GIZ doing? But see, we all wanna coordinate, but the country cannot have, and sometimes like a Santa Claus wish list, right? So they give it to you and they give it to all the donors, and then you pick and choose how are you gonna help this country? And if we're not coordinated, we end up replicating efforts. So this was made by design. We want to be able to talk because otherwise we are not going to be able to use the funding or the resources we have in a sustainable way in countries. And so all this ecosystem of donors in the forest monitoring is big, and they all bring something special. And we still need to keep coordinating and talking about our efforts, but it's very special for us to work with the group of GFOI because we're dealing with Norway, we're dealing with Germany, we're dealing with FAO, and all of these bring different perspectives. Norway just signed a partnership with Planets and provide a mosaic of high-resolution data for forested countries twice a year. So that contribution is a great deal for the work we do. So all the donors in this area can just look at that and use that data for our training or for our capacity building methods. So it's great, but all of that has been in coordination. Norway sit on the GFOI table and communicate and get input from all the donors and decide, okay, this is something smart to do. This is something that is needed. So yeah, I can talk about that a lot too. So I'm just gonna give everything.
Yeah, I think we have a lot to learn from how GFOI and Silver Carbon are working in that regard, and how the collaboration and partnerships work. Because I know very squarely that WGCapD wants to play a strong role in that, in facilitating and coordination. So I think we have a lot to learn there. But Chris, I'm sure you have something you'd like to add here.
Absolutely, yeah. So actually, I think, and I would like to integrate the question that John posted here on the chat, like to what extent are recipient countries at the table? I think we need to first look at who are we talking about if we talk about donors, right? Eventually, in a similar way, like if you talk about users, right? Like looking at what are the users' needs, we also need to look at what are the needs of the financing community, right? So a donor has certain incentives to follow, right? A donor has certain agendas, mostly political agendas to follow. So you need to kind of be able to talk their language to actually get them and convince them to spend money on something. So the incentive part is one thing. I guess if you look at development, traditionally, a lot of the money or financing for pushing space technology, Earth observation, etc., into development has not been funded by the traditional development donors. It actually has been funded by the space community, by entities like NASA, like ESA, etc. So for the development community, they often consider us donors, right? Which is a very wrong perception, and we need to kind of counteract that because we are not donors. So the thing is also, if we as space agencies approach donors, then, I'm always very careful, like, I'm not asking the donors for money to fund space agency activities. No, I'm asking them to align money for a certain cause, to stimulate a certain output, right? So if we look at financing from, for example, at the World Bank or development finance, generally speaking, I think we need to move towards a more holistic perspective of development finance, which is, and that brings in the recipient countries. You can classify broadly development finance in two categories. One is donor money and one is the country's money, right? So if a country takes a loan from the World Bank, that money is actually the country's money because they will have to pay back that loan. So eventually it's either donors' money or the country's money, and the recipient countries in that context are very much involved, especially with development banks. I mean, for every country, there is something called a country partnership framework. Getting back to Sylvia's Santa Claus wish list, right? I mean, in a sense, the banks sit together with the governments to assess what are the priorities, what things need to be addressed, what are the real development challenges to be addressed and to be financed. And I think from our perspective, again, we need to move away from finding funding for space applications. No, we need to integrate space applications in development finance. So basically, if we try to, and we've been doing all of this, we are trying to set up a space partnership trust fund right now at the World Bank, but not with the focus on space, but with the focus on the impact in development operations. So I think the example that Sylvia had with Norway and the forest community is a very good one, because in fact that is, you know, the recent funding of 50 million roughly for purchasing raw imagery for the tropics is actually coming not from the space community, but it comes from the development community. But obviously now we need to build on that. We need to actually find financing to make sense of that data, because the raw image alone won't solve any problems, right? We need to do something with it. And that again requires financing, and it shouldn't be us. It should be integrated in the general approaches of forest monitoring, of, you know, disaster risk finance, of climate adaptation, of all of this in the banks. And Stephen, you are on mute, but please interrupt me anytime.
I just wanted to ask you on because the donors that I'm speaking to are not the World Bank, it's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it's NORAD, it's CEDA, it's those guys. So how would the Space Partnership Trust Fund align with, you know, what they're doing in their work?
So the World Bank is never the donor, right? So when I talk about holistic financing, a trust fund, the bank acts as a trustee, right? So the donor money comes from the entities you talk to, right? It's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Development, you know, from the BMSEDs, DFIDs, AFDs, and USAIDs. So that's the donor angle. But the thing is, going through, of course, you have multilateral finance and bilateral finance, but if you go the way through multilateral institutions such as the World Bank or UNDP or others, basically you get access to this continuous policy dialogue, right? You leverage a whole world of other financing rather than just funding a certain project in a certain country. You integrate it in operational thinking, right, in policy making. And I think that's the way we need to go.
So, but it won't be built into like loans to countries. It will be a separate fund where people apply for. I'm just trying to understand it.
Oh, you refer to the Space Partnership Fund?
Yeah.
No, so the Space Partnership Fund is basically set up in a way to within the World Bank, and also an individual fund also within the Asian Development Bank, to complement technical, to focus on, in fact, capacity building and skills transfer activities, and complement technical developments that ESA is financing, right? In a sense, transferring programmatic ownership to the banks, and you know, really foster the integration into their operational thinking. So it will be a mix of, you know, a dedicated funding in a space partnership trust fund, integrating with resources from entities like IDA, the International Development Association, integrating in operational finance, which actually means credits and loans, so the country's money, right? So it will be a package. We have an example in West Africa. We have the West African Coastal Areas Management Program. Actually, WACA has allocated more than $50 million to capacity building on satellite Earth observation, which ESA will complement through technical developments that we implement in my GDA program. So it's all about a holistic perspective, and that's what donors want, right?
That's great. Thank you so much. I want to just turn the conversation slightly. And Sylvia, there's a question in the chat that I think you might have some insights on from Sergio Camacho about the capacity building at the local level. We had also had a comment about the change in technical staff within countries in the frequent turnover, and also the lack of support for political winds blowing one way or another with decision makers and policymakers. How have you, through your work and working at a national level or even a regional level, how have you managed this challenge with your capacity building efforts in navigating these kind of changes of the guard, so to speak?
Yeah, that is an excellent question, Erin, because it's actually a challenge, right? I see capacity building as a process where there is different phases. And first, like I mentioned, we explore what needs to be changed, what needs to be done. And then with this exploration is the country have the capacity to absorb the capacity building that we're going to provide. It have the equipment, it have the institutional arrangements in place or not, right? So in some cases, we have learned by, lessons learned, we have learned by mistakes. In some cases, we went into a country, we did a whole capacity building program, showed them how to come up with some maps for a change, doing themselves. But we work with people that were actually contractors paying from a donor, right? So when the contract finished, the capacity didn't stay in the country, right? The capacity left. So that was one of the lessons learned. So we want to, when we start working with the countries, we want to make a road so we know, okay, we're not going to only involve the ministries because we know the turnaround of people is very frequent here. We want to involve the university as well. We want to start looking at programs. A great partnership is with the Servier hubs, for example. Looking at the Servier hubs because they have people in place that can be a backstop if everything breaks out on one ministry or they change all the technical people in there and they lost the processes that we have created, then Servier can help us out. So yes, it's been a process, but we assess that. We assess the capacity that the country have to ingest the capacity development. And when I'm talking about remote sensing, for example, when I'm talking about a country that have enough institutional capacity, people in positions that are sort of permanent positions, or they have these positions funded by their own government, then we assess what is the level of capacity we're going to bring to them. They probably need some more detailed things, not only like, okay, this is how you can use a global map. This is how they probably can go beyond that. They can probably create their own data, mix different data sets. So it's a one-on-one case, but that's a real problem. And I think that thinking about backstops, thinking about what will be your alternative if there is a problem with the partner you're working in country, it's something that we have to think ahead, because these things are definitely going to happen when we're talking about capacity building in countries. And so programs like Servier hubs, involving universities, involving other institutions that are at least a little bit more stable in country, it's what we have been doing.
Excellent. So we're running.
We still have time.
You want to just come? Yeah, we want to come in quickly there, Chris. We're running short on time, unsurprisingly.
I know. Very, very briefly. I would just like to echo, what Sylvia said in terms of involving not just the government counterparts, but moving to universities, etc. I mean, that's what I was referring to with skills transfer, right? We need to train the next generation of people there for them themselves take this forward. But I would like to make one more comment in terms of, you mentioned a project goes and then stops and then it's done, right? So I think that's why also we try to engage at the programmatic level, right? So we try to influence a programmatic change of thinking, right? Not just an individual project that focuses on, capacity building, accompanying a certain technical assistance initiative, but trying at a programmatic level, integrating capacity building in that financing, and that goes over decades, right? So, for example, talking to entities like the Green Climate Fund or the Global Environment Facility, for them to really use this as part of an underlying thread, like for everything they finance, right? In the World Bank, you have such things like ticking boxes on gender, on climate co-benefits, right? And it would be nice to actually have another box on, Earth observation. But at the same time, actually, it wouldn't be so nice, because I hope, and you asked, where do we want to see us in 10 years from now? I hope that in 10 years from now, we don't even have to talk about it anymore. Actually, a real achievement would be if it's just used as a new normal, and if it doesn't have to be pushed, if it doesn't have to be a box to be ticked, but if the value is so clear that it's just used. And I think that's something that we hopefully can work towards to also together.
I'm going to ask for the indulgence of participants. Just one last question I would like to ask the group, and so maybe you can answer the question in any last word you have. But Barb presented that slide about the economic impact of EO, the use of EO data, and I saw a World Economic Forum report in January that talked about the economic potential of the EO sector to help Africa, not just with development and agriculture and food security, but also really to grow economies. Are we engaged, this group, thinking about capacity building? Are we doing enough to engage the private sector in capacity development and asking for their investments as well in this work? What are your thoughts about that? Go ahead, Stephen.
So I was part of that report.
Oh.
I've tried to move how GEO has been communicating from working with little industry publications that maybe reach 30, 50,000, which is important for the science and technology, but trying to get to government leaders, industry leaders, and others through the World Economic Forum. So I've been working with them for 2 years now to do exactly that. So that's the result of that report. It took a while to do. My personal opinion is no. I think we're miles off, and I think that when I asked Barb the question about incentives, that's part of what I was getting at. What are the incentives for the private sector? Because they don't all want to just sell data. We're working with, I've personally brought in about $12 million to GEO from AWS, Google Earth Engine, and Microsoft AI for Earth. And we have 55 projects running, and that was cash, cloud credits, and engineering technical support. And we're not even scraping the surface there. And that's just the big players. Esri is about to make an offer. Well, they've already made an offer. We've not announced it. We're speaking to Intel, to Trimble, but it's all the big guys. And so I think there's something about getting to the SMEs, which Europe actually does really well through Horizon Europe in Horizon 2020. It's getting to those, the analytics companies and the startups and the ones that are doing some of the more, I guess, and even in Africa, this was the reason for the World Economic Forum posting that report. We want to get the SMEs in Africa who know nothing about Earth observations but have a problem where Earth observations can maybe help to come in and support us. So I'll leave it there. I say there's a lot of work to be done.
Can I say one thing?
Go ahead.
Well, this is, I appreciate it, Stephen. Your vision is very at a high level, I think. And I think I have a different vision on more working on one-on-one with countries. I think that we will not be able to do that right now with the volume of data that we have, with all these different missions and the integration of this data, if we don't rely on things like Google Earth Engine, for example. So we do have big, strong partnerships with them, but to work at a country level, right? So it's nothing like a bigger level, but it's at a country level. We definitely use the private sector and Planet, same thing involved.
Just to be clear, everyone we're working with is at country level. I mean, GEO is a national government agency organization. So that's everyone I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, kind of globally finding incentives for them to participate, whether it's around deforestation and looking at carbon monitoring or net zero or whatever it is. I think we still need to package that. I guess that's what I tried to describe, obviously very poorly.
Yeah. No, that you described very poorly, but yeah, no, I get your point. And then one more thing I wanted to say, I don't know if Barbie's still on the call, but she presented some of the economic evaluation of Landsat, and my colleague Krista Straub from USGS, she's here on this call too. She published an open file report. So this is for 2017, and Barbara mentioned that in 2011 it was 2.19 billion the value, and then for 2017 in this new report is 3.45 billion. So I just want to mention that because I'm not sure if Barb is still on the call or not.
Yeah, I don't think she is, but if Krista, if you're able to drop a link to that report in the chat, I'm sure people would love to see that. Chris, over to you for the last word.
No, thanks a lot. I think this has fascinating discussion. I mean, just on the private sector engagement, again, I think you need to approach it from two different angles. It's like, do you want to attract private sector investment, or do you want to engage private sector in operationalizing certain services? So the private sector investment thing is what Stephen has also kind of alluded to. But on the second part, I think that, if we demonstrate services, we know they work, they are mature on the market, they can be procured, right? That's something where we open the door for private sector, for these SMEs, for entities that can, in an operational way, then implement these services and actually add value to where that value is needed. So I think that's a lot how ESA operates, because as you know, we do, not much in-house, we do a lot through procurements to private sector, and eventually then we basically build capacity in two ways. We build capacity in the private sector to understand the development challenges and be able to actually address them, and we build capacity in the development sector to ask the right question and engage in the right way with the private sector. So I think in that sense, the space community and CEOs in that sense can add a lot of value in really growing this segment and making it work in an operational sense.
Great. We could go on for a lot longer, and I still have a long list of questions, so I'll follow up with you at some point. But thank you so much. It's been a really wonderful panel. The chat has been very lively. There's been a lot of discussions about measuring the impact of capacity development and theory of change, and suggestion that maybe we should have a separate event just to look at that. So I think that's a reflection of the enthusiasm of the audience. Thanks to our three panelists, Stephen, Sylvia, and Christoph. Thank you so much for being with us.